In the mansion of the court mage Lembrecht, the main laboratory was complete chaos. Standing in the middle of the magic circle and wiping blood from her mouth, the heroine was late again. The girl was pale after so many experiments and had terrible dark circles under her eyes. She felt terrible towards Xavier, who trusted that his fiancée could reverse time. For him to ascend to the throne, he needed to go back to the past, as even His Majesty desired it. That's why the prince counted on Genesía, who was the most powerful mage in the entire kingdom. However, the heroine knew that reversing time was impossible, as no one had achieved it yet. But her beloved insisted, grabbing her shoulders so tightly that it hurt her. They both knew how the court treated Xavier, and for his happiness, he had to ascend the throne. Emperor Tascu, ruler of the Gyron Empire, recognized the bastard as royal family. But he did not choose an heir, which unleashed a bloody struggle for the throne among the princes. Genesía's fiancé was that very same bastard, and he needed her help to rise to power. For the protagonist, such power meant absolutely nothing. But she found it unbearable to see how Xavier suffered because of his own family. As for her, her entire family died from an illness. And she, an illegitimate daughter, was very lucky. The prince sincerely hoped she would help him without fail, and then they would soon marry. But the heroine weakened too much trying to influence time itself. But if she succeeded this time, she was sure that she and the prince would find a cure for her. Gathering her thoughts, she staggered to the desk, pressing a napkin against her nose. Soon, her best friend ran towards her, who didn't understand why Genesía was still in her laboratory. The heroine froze. Lisbeth couldn't be there, and her friend wanted to come up for a hot tea. Later, in the living room of the Lembrecht mansion, she discovered that the heroine was still working on the time travel spell. Seeing her skin pale as chalk and her lifeless gaze, her friend knew that Genesía was completely absorbed in her work. The heroine thought His Highness was very displeased by this, as he hadn't visited her in a long time. Lisbeth decided she shouldn't take it personally. She was the most famous mage in Gyron and an example to follow. Thanking her kind words, Genesía remembered they had known each other for 10 years. Since the academy. According to her best friend, it was time she recognized her status and achievements. Finishing her tea, the girl no longer wanted to bother her friend with her presence and decided to leave. Suddenly, the heroine smelled an aroma coming from Lisbeth that seemed very familiar. The friend was surprised and thought she had put on too much perfume, but in reality, Genesía simply recognized the scent. Upon hearing they were perfumes with the scent of dried roses, the heroine felt a deep shock. On her previous birthday, Xavier had gifted his fiancée that exact same perfume. According to him, they were made exclusively for the imperial family. That's why now, sunk in great confusion, Genesía wanted to know, where did her friend get that perfume? Very puzzled by her reaction, Lisbeth thought she had really overdone the perfume. Thinking that similar perfumes were simply sold somewhere else, the heroine was glad that they both liked the same scents. Very happy with her words, the friend immediately hugged Genesía, causing her a tired smile. Wishing her sweet friend a good rest, the lady hurried to leave her. After that, closing her eyes calmly, the heroine recalled that rose scent again. Every time she smells it, she remembers Xavier, who taught her to love. And now, she also thinks of her best friend, Lisbeth, who always helped her and supported. Genesía was sure that without them, she wouldn't make it, and that's why she wanted to meet their expectations. To do this, she needed to concentrate completely on the research and gathering her ideas. She sat at the desk late into the night. Performing complex calculations, the heroine finally found the cause of past failures. With the idea that this time everything would turn out well, she rushed to her laboratory to test the theory. However, upon going down to the basement, she froze at the entrance. The door was ajar, but the most alarming thing was the light burning inside. Approaching the door silently, she was shocked to see her fiancé inside. And her best friend. The prince didn't understand why they had to go through all this, when they could simply steal the sorceress's records with the research. Meanwhile, putting the test tubes from the table into a bag, Lisbeth decided that would have been too cruel. Genesía will be devastated by the loss of the notes, and she doesn't have much time left. Xavier, thinking she was too kind to the heroine, began to harass her, enjoying the scent of dried roses. It turns out she put on perfume while His Highness was still sleeping. The prince decided that a beauty like Lisbeth suited this scent much better than Genesía. Unable to stand it any longer, the heroine decisively entered the laboratory, dropping the book with the research notes in shock. Completely confused. Didn't she understand what those two were doing there? Trembling with tears and resentment, she was shocked that they not only stole her research, but were also fondling each other like animals. Looking at her indignantly, Xavier didn't understand who she dared to call animals. Shouting in response, Genesía didn't understand how they dared to do this to her when she trusted them so much. Furious, she decided she would never forgive those people after such a betrayal. Beside herself with rage, she lunged at Lisbeth and grabbed her hair, making her scream. A few seconds later, the protagonist received a powerful blow to the jaw from her fiancé. She flew back and hit her head against the corner of the table, instantly losing consciousness. The table wobbled and the candle on it fell, setting the papers on fire and causing a raging fire. Looking resignedly at the burning manuscripts, Xavier decided it was time to flee with his lover. At that moment, the heroine began to wake up, feeling warm liquid running down her head and a metallic taste in her mouth. Seeing that Lisbeth was not fleeing and was heading towards her, a spark of hope shone in Genesía's eyes. But against all odds, the lady picked up a book with research notes. Smiling at her friend, after thanking the heroine for all these years and for this farewell gift, the young woman returned to Xavier's side. They turned around and left calmly, leaving the betrayed sorceress in the middle of the flames. Collapsing exhausted on the floor, Genesía felt her strength slowly abandoning her. The fire intensified and approached her, but she decided she couldn't just die like that. Gathering her last strength, she began to crawl, feeling that she still had a little magic left. Dipping a finger blackened by soot into her own blood, she began to draw a magic circle on the floor. Even if it seemed unreal, she had to at least try to rewind time. She had to do it. The heroine was an illegitimate daughter in the Lembrecht family, and her birth was a curse. Her mother was a maid forced to sleep with the count, and the woman suffered because of her daughter's existence. Constantly hearing that it would have been better if she hadn't been born, Genesía was frequently beat. Her mother believed that no one loved the girl and that one day, they would simply use her and abandon her. Over time, a terrible disease wiped out the entire Lembrecht family in a short period. Being the only survivor, the heroine inherited the Lembrecht county, recalling the cremation of her relatives' bodies. Disfigured by the illness, Genesía understood that her life had always been unbearable. Suddenly, she felt a strange sensation, and the heat of the flames began to gradually fade. Her head no longer hurt, and her eyes were closed as if she were sleeping. And suddenly, the girl heard a familiar voice. Feeling her strength returning as well, the heroine jumped up from her seat, completely confused. She was sitting at her desk in the laboratory just as the butler entered. His name was Lance Million, and he was very worried that his mistress had spent another whole night working. Realizing that she had truly returned to the past, Genesía decided to ask what day it was today. Not understanding what was happening to her mistress today, the butler hurried to specify the current date. It turned out she had gone back in time exactly 1 month before her engagement to Xavier. The heroine wasn't even sure if it would work, but she was healthy again. Barely holding back tears, she had actually managed to create a spell that distorts time. Her laboratory was completely intact and looked quite tidy. And noticing that her notes were also back, Genesía entered a state of complete ecstasy. Suddenly, she remembered the faces of Lispel and Xavier, who betrayed and murdered her. Pressing her lips from the fury consuming her, the heroine decided she would never forgive them for what they did. Just remembering the past made her feel disgusted, and to clear her head a bit, she went for a walk in the garden. Upon hearing herself being called, she immediately recognized that repulsive voice that turned her stomach. Greeting his future fiancé with a smile, the prince was glad to have run into her in the garden. He tenderly took her hand, but Genesía, disgusted, pulled her palm away and clutched it to herself. Believing it was a coincidence, the hero was happy to announce that he had prepared a dress for her for the ball. Upon hearing that she already had an outfit, Xavier was extremely surprised. Knowing she was usually much quieter, did the prince think he might have offended her? Keeping silent, she wanted to tell him everything, but the fury had left her speechless. Suddenly the butler appeared, happy to find his mistress. He hurried to clarify to His Highness that the lady hadn't slept all night and worked on her research. Understanding that he was tired of trying to please her, Xavier just smiled at him. Then he directed a stern look at Lance. Not understanding how a mere butler dared to interrupt their conversation, extending his hand. The prince wanted to punish the servant for incompetence in the name of his mistress. At that moment, Genesía remembered how he had hit her in the face with all his strength. And now, Xavier intended to do the same to Lance, who had done nothing wrong. Abruptly stepping in and protecting the butler, the heroine decided that whoever raises a hand to her subordinate will raise it against her. She didn't understand. Was His Highness deciding to show his true colors like this? Turning away and leaving with the butler, she left the prince in complete confusion. In shock, quite tired from that day, the heroine knew that Xavier could find his way back alone. Returning to the mansion, she discovered that Lance was fine, while Lisbeth watched them from behind the bushes. Knowing that her friend used to dote on Xavier, the girl didn't understand. When did she change so much? Later, serving tea to his mistress, the butler discovered that she wanted to refuse the engagement with the prince. She understood that he might want to know the reason for such a decision and didn't know how to answer him. But Lance only smiled at her words, perfectly understanding the countess's decision. According to him, she should always be alert, as head of the Lembrecht estate. The problem was that if she rejected His Highness gently, she wouldn't achieve anything. So, Lance thought she might set her sights on some young man from a prominent noble family. But the protagonist understood that whoever she married, people would want her blood. Not her. Furthermore, if the emperor supported her and Xavier, no one would object or propose marriage to her. She needed a compelling reason to cancel the engagement, and only one person came to the butler's mind. We are talking about Prince Callion, the second potential heir of Giern, whose engagement cancellation was a widespread rumor. He was not interested in the wedding and, according to rumors, was happy about the cancellation, which infuriated the imperial family. Now, understanding the tension in the royal family, Genesía decided that this man might understand her. With a satisfied expression after drinking tea, she decided she would visit the second prince soon. The next night was unusually quiet. Not even the wind could be heard on the street. Stealthily opening the balcony door, someone entered Callion's room, leaving dark footprints. Approaching the bed, the cloaked man saw the prince's head sleeping. Peeking out from under the blanket, drawing his dagger, with a furious smile on his face, he brandished it over the defenseless body. Sticking the knife directly into His Highness's back, the assassin naively thought his job ended there. However, seeing no blood, he removed the blanket and only saw Callion's clothes. The prince, meanwhile, rose from behind and pointed his sword at the intruder's neck. First of all, the hero wanted to know who had sent the assassin to his chambers. Callion von Highness Garon's patience was running out, and the assassin had better confess immediately. A while later, Genesía arrived at the central hall of the Ministry of Magic. It was, as always, crowded around her, and upon entering, she began to look around. The court mage, Cedric Windsor, spotted her at the entrance and hurried towards her. He wanted to ask her about the magical impulse they had been discussing earlier. Handing him a book with her research notes, the hero wanted her to describe that impulse there. Then the heroine wondered, wasn't he afraid she might review her project in those notes? But Cedric was sure she would never do something like that, something that Lisbeth, who was approaching, completely agreed with. The girl also thought that Genesía would never stoop to such a thing. After all, even in her student years, she became famous for her kindness and honesty, although, of course, she became much more known for her magical abilities. Turning to the heroine, the pseudo-friend hoped she would agree with her words. With an icy stare, Genesía chose to completely ignore this provocation. Her own mother cursed her from birth, decreeing that no one would ever love her. Everyone mocked and despised her, blaming her for bringing the illness to her family to rise to power. Lisbeth was the only one who genuinely approached her, becoming a beacon of light in her existence. However, that rosy reality turned out to be a mere and cruel fabricated illusion. As she burned alive in the laboratory, the protagonist discovered the bitter truth and the harsh reality of the world. And now she abruptly withdrew her hand from the false friend, leaving her completely bewildered. Not understanding what was happening to her, Lisbeth still hoped Genesía would spare her a moment more. She longed for the protagonist's help to teach a lesson, while she had to prepare documents for Lord Cedric. Genesía might have refused the request, but a rather interesting idea was brewing in her mind. It was a lesson for the second prince, and fortunately, the court mage agreed to give it along with the heroine. Upon hearing her confirmation, Lisbeth was overjoyed. She already knew she wouldn't be able to resist. Laughing happily, she thought the heroine was truly kind. At that moment, her alarm sounded, and bidding everyone farewell, she hurried to her duties. Stepping out onto the balcony, she ran to the meeting point, hoping not to be late. The lady had spent too much time on those two, and the hero might have already left. Hiding behind a column, Lisbeth sighed in relief upon seeing that Xavier was there. Approaching him, she cheerfully greeted His Highness, who was also happy to see her. She also thanked him greatly for the handkerchief embroidered with her characteristic design. Completely blushing, the young woman thought perhaps she had overdone it a little. But the prince found it beautiful. It reminded him so much of his mother, convinced that fate brought them together. He hoped the lady would spare him a moment. Listening on the bench to the story of her last encounter with Genesía, she feigned surprise. Xavier believed the heroine was cold, as if she didn't need a prince like him. Completely confused, Lisbeth realized she hadn't been mistaken before. Apparently, Genesía had no idea how to treat His Highness. How outrageous. What irritated the girl the most was when Genesía boasted about Prince Xavier. Once the heroine showed her a small box, a personal gift from the prince. For Genesía, it was proof of love and care. So Lisbeth decided to snatch it away. Now she felt sorry for Xavier, so good to the heroine and so mistreated. If she were the friend, she would never have behaved so ignorantly towards him. Taking her hands, the prince was intrigued to know what the lady would do in that case. Sighing languidly, Lisbeth was willing to do everything His Highness asked. That same day, in Prince Callion's salon at the Winter Palace, Cedric and Genesía were preparing for the lesson. The court mage decided to advise the young woman that it was essential to consider the second prince. He fought monsters on the border. And surprisingly, the battle was without casualties, and Callion himself returned without a single scratch. That's why many call him the devil in person, and the court knights revere him as an exceptional swordsman. Suddenly, the doors opened, and the prince entered the salon, accompanied by his loyal servants. Immediately, the order was given to greet His Highness, the second prince of Gyern, after which the protagonists bowed respectfully before him. Cedric introduced himself as the instructor for the day, while Genesía Lembrecht would be his assistant. The hero did not react to their words, fixing his cold gaze on the heroine. Smiling, she knew this man wouldn't be easy, but it was exactly what she was looking for. The lesson began, and Cedric embarked on a long monologue about the magical art. Ignoring every word, the hero had already lost count of how many times they tried to kill him. Will this ever end? Meanwhile, according to the court mage, the most difficult element to control was earth. There were only 9 mages capable of mastering earth, and Lady Lembrecht was one of them. Hearing this, the prince raised his gaze thoughtfully and stared intently at the heroine. To his surprise, Genesía winked at him with a smile, pointing at something. Confused, Callion realized she wanted him to look down. Looking at the table in front of him, he saw a book, noticing a rolled-up piece of paper between its pages. After reading what it contained, he decided to cancel classes for today. Convinced of how fascinating it would be, he ordered Lady Lembrecht to follow him. Fulfilling the order, the protagonist was glad it was easy. He stopped dead in his tracks and she crashed. Her glasses fell to the floor. Kalian thought he could ignore the note, but he was backed against the wall. The prince was perplexed by her question. Was he tired of the attacks? Smiling, Genesía wanted to propose a deal to His Highness. Picking up her glasses, she decided she would protect him from the assassination attempts. In return, she wanted to pretend they were having a real romance. He coughed, embarrassed. Why had she chosen him specifically? It turns out it was all because he was an intelligent, cold, and cruel man. In other words, he was exactly the type the lady was diligently seeking. The heroine was not interested in love or marriage. Nor did she want people to use her magic. Instead, she only wanted to study magic and dedicate her life to it. All she wanted to get from His Highness was protection for exactly 1 year. The prince still didn't understand how she was going to stop the impending assassination attempts. Upon hearing that she could predict them with magic, the hero already thought so. But they weren't given a clear answer. However, the prince simply didn't ask Genesía that question directly. Before her time travel, Kalian lost his right hand during an explosion. After 167 assassination attempts, he finally turned to the Ministry of Magic and ordered them to make him a security device. But if they couldn't do anything before, the story will be different now. Genesía forged the magic ring she wanted to give him with her own hands. If danger lurks, the jewel will emit a crimson glow as a warning. The prince will lose nothing by taking it, and she is only waiting for an opportunity. With that said, she left, and instantly, her guards entered the chamber. The servants heard everything, and it seemed like a very shady offer to them. They distrusted mages. They thought they would stab him at the slightest opportunity. The warriors wanted to kick her out, but they received an order to follow her. Her eyes showed no fear, only unyielding determination. Moreover, there was something familiar about that sorceress, something that impelled him to trust her. Also, she was right that he had nothing to lose. So why not give it a try? Meanwhile, walking through the palace, Genesía thought he wasn't as terrible as she expected. At least this man listened to her, unlike all the other hypocrites. Suddenly, Xavier and Lisbeth appeared in front of her at the same time, making her flinch. It turns out the pseudo-friends found out about her meeting with the second prince. And they came here, expecting she would be fine. They learned about this meeting from Cedric, who, lost in his worries, ran into them by chance. Not understanding why they were still standing around, the prince invited his friends to the senators for tea. He decided to boast that he had secured the garden with magic, and that now the blue roses bloomed all year round. The court mage understood that maintaining such a garden must be very expensive. But according to the prince, money didn't matter to him at all. Sipping calmly, the protagonist understood that those words were a lie, as Xavier spent all his money on himself. He was so obsessed with impressing everyone with his giant palace that he completely forgot about the estate. All of this resulted in serious money problems, and in the end, the lavish prince turned out to be a fiasco. The situation reached a point where he couldn't even pay the wages of his own servants. Giving Xavier a discreet kick, Lisbeth thought this beautiful palace said a lot about its owner. She was amazed at the luck her dear friend had with her beloved. Considering Genesía incredibly lucky, the lady would also wish to meet someone like His Highness. After those words, Cedric jumped up from his seat and fled, pretending he had remembered something important. Smiling, the prince remembered that his fiancée could control 4 elements and was a star at the academy. The lady remembered all of her friend's student years, who, according to her, only knew magic. All her classmates envied her and completely ignored her existence, so the girl was always alone. But everything changed completely when she and Lisbeth became friends. Genesía remembered accidentally overhearing a conversation between her friend and other students, who didn't understand why she associated with a witch. It turned out that Lisbeth simply didn't want the protagonist to curse others for hurting her. Upon hearing that she associated with her for the common good, the protagonist was astonished. Since then, she suspected that her friend had some hidden motive. But she constantly turned a blind eye. She knew she was insignificant in their eyes. And now, Genesía will no longer tolerate it in silence. The protagonist remembered how they always worked together on experiments and how Lisbeth struggled against changes. The lady was always surrounded by friends whom she could ask for help, but she didn't. Genesía felt pleased to be the only one who could help her friend at the academy. Although there were also a couple of classmates who thought the witch was just wasting her time. With a smile and a sip of tea, the protagonist was sure that Lisbeth remembered them. She referred to those two boys she was dating at the same time. Flustered by embarrassment and shock, the girl jumped up from her seat and hit the table. That couldn't be true. Laughing nervously, she thought their relationships had barely overlapped, and Genesía must be confused. Her whole body trembling, she didn't understand how the protagonist dared to say that in front of His Highness. With a forced chuckle, the protagonist hurried to pretend that perhaps something had gotten mixed up in her head. Deciding that everyone makes mistakes sometimes, the prince invited the ladies for a walk in the garden. He walked ahead with his fiancée, while Lisbeth followed him dragging her feet. Grinding her teeth in rage, she didn't understand how Genesía dared to do that to her. Walking with her head held high, the protagonist apparently had completely forgotten her place. So, determined to remind her sweet friend of her insignificance, the lady was sure that Genesía would never surpass her. In the past, during an alchemy class, Lisbeth's potion suddenly exploded. Catastrophe. Everyone immediately pitied her and blamed the heroine, considering her a complete nobody. Remembering that she had caused her family's illness, everyone believed that Genesía had broken the tube on purpose. However, all the heroine did was carefully advise her not to mix those potions. But every time she received this advice, Lisbeth thought her friend looked down on her and did everything backward. Suddenly, the lady came to her defense, claiming that Genesía hadn't done it on purpose. Such innocence. Now, the heroine understood that her friend had tried her best to make her suffer. How cruel. And now, she surely wanted revenge for her, remembering those boys at the tea party with the prince. Placing a hand on her shoulder, the girl wanted to say something, but Genesía abruptly pushed her away. What tension! After twisting her ankle, Lisbeth fell to the floor right in front and got down on all fours. Seeing a partially erased magic rune beneath her, the girl was perplexed. She didn't understand. Could that be the spell the prince boasted about so much? Suddenly, the rune flickered, and all the blue roses that Xavier admired so much turned common red. Seeing this, the hero fell into a great confusion and turned blue with horror. Frightened by his appearance, Lisbeth jumped up and tried to justify herself. Approaching her, the heroine did not want His Highness to pressure the girl, as surely she hadn't done it on purpose. Turning with a smile towards her false friend, she hoped it had truly been an accident. The prince reluctantly accepted that there was no problem, and Genesía knew he would understand everything. Lisbeth had nothing to worry about, as there was nothing that couldn't be bought. The prince was rich, and the heroine was sure he would restore the rune in days. Laughing happily, she was delighted that everything resolved so easily. Alone with Lisbeth, Xavier recalled her words that she would do anything for him. And now he sincerely hoped she didn't mean this prank by that. Horrified by his words, the girl screamed, considering this situation absurd and a misunderstanding. Because even if you thought about it logically, how could a rune be erased so easily? She was sure that Genesía had been behind this, framing her. Shouting in response, the prince considered those words nonsense, since that clumsy idiot would never stoop to that. Suddenly, a terrifying idea struck Lisbeth, and she remembered that the heroine hadn't been herself lately. She had a feeling that she had become a completely different person, which gave her the chills. Recalling that Genesía abruptly rejected her courtship, the prince couldn't help but agree with the lady. Wishing to help him uncover the truth, Lisbeth planned to monitor her friend at the ministry and report any oddities. The young woman hoped Xavier would entrust this matter to her, which she would dedicate herself to with full seriousness. Looking at her, the prince involuntarily recalled an event that occurred a few months ago. At that time, a grand banquet was held at the imperial palace, and the hall was full of guests. Seeing Genesía among them, he didn't understand what that bumpkin was doing there and how the hell she managed to get in. Her mere presence took Xavier's appetite away, and he had a glass of good wine in his hand. Noticing his fixed gaze on the heroine, a certain lord assumed that His Highness had an eye for talent. That modest lady was the youngest mage among the courtiers and also the most powerful. Most mages can only control one of the 4 elements. But oh surprise! The heroine mastered all the elements at once. A marvel. She doesn't even need magic gems to draw runes. And what's more, she made a wooden prosthesis for the lord. Knowing she is a star in the magical world, Xavier knew she was the one. The emperor decreed, if the bastard finds a way to return to the past, he will be my successor. And apparently, Genesía Lembrecht was the person who would help him bend time. Therefore, he gladly accepted Lisbeth's proposal. Spying on the heroine to find out what she was plotting, taking her hands, he was ready to trust her completely. But only this time. Meanwhile, the heroine happily skipped towards her laboratory, humming a tune. It was enough to work a little on the rune beforehand, and everything would turn out perfectly. Feeling great relief, she suddenly saw someone at the entrance of her research center. With his face hidden behind the hood, Genesía, not understanding what he wanted, approached the stranger. Believing he had reached the right place, the boy smiled. He turned towards her and removed his hood. As he did so, the heroine, to her amazement, instantly recognized him and was completely taken aback. The blonde with golden eyes, named Manuel Sieta, a member of the Academy's youth field team. He was happy about this long-awaited encounter. Then, sitting at the table, she gave him an ice cream and discovered, surprise, that the second prince had sent him to spy on her. Her proposal to Kalyan was quite unusual. Did he have hidden motives? She had to find out. Only trusted mages can enter the ministry, and the protagonist was the only mage close to the second prince. The heroine didn't expect him to believe her instantly. But a spy doesn't reveal his true intentions just like that. Of course, it wasn't true. And normally, Manuel should not be discovered under any circumstances. But he thought it was different with her and confessed his doubts to his lord. Kalyan allowed Genesía to reveal herself, but on the condition that she informed him of everything down to the smallest detail. Hearing that, the heroine understood it was an excellent opportunity to prove her worth. She decided to confess that she now studied restoration magic, but Manuel knew that no one had succeeded in it. But suddenly, Genesía restored the ice cream he had eaten earlier right before his eyes. Technically, it is not restoration, but time travel. And she deduced it when she teleported herself. The hero was amazed that his talent and creativity were enough for him to invent something like that. Not all mages were capable of that, and therefore, he hoped his old friend would intercede for her before the Lord. Looking at her with a smile, the hero understood that she was still as wonderful as ever. Later, Manuel discovered that he had changed faculties quite quickly thanks to Lord Windsor. And Genesía, meanwhile, saw a sword and found out that the hero was trained by the unparalleled sword master. Kalyan. Realizing how much he respected His Highness, he internally compared it to a puppy's love for its master. But besides his lord, he also felt sincere respect for the heroine, which confused her a bit. He remembered that his older brother, Lopez, was the true star of the Sieta family. Being in his brother's shadow, Manuel was very quiet and even gloomy during his time at the academy. But he was actually quite cheerful, and now he wondered, why didn't Genesía improve her eyesight with magic? The glasses didn't bother him at all, and he didn't understand the question, but it turned out he just wanted to see them without them. Seeing the heroine's face, he blushed suddenly and decided they should go eat something. Shortly after, they were in the ministry's dining room, and Genesía decided to invite her spy friend. She served him a lot of meat dishes. She wanted him to eat well and regain strength. However, they had barely started eating when, suddenly, Lisbeth approached them with a plate of salad. The heroine was very surprised by her appearance. She thought she wouldn't come within a meter after the incident in the garden. Confused because her friend was eating without her, Lisbeth was also astonished to see the protagonist. With a malicious smile, she wondered if His Highness Xavier knew his fiancée was having lunch with another man. Unmoved, Genesía put a piece of meat in her mouth and decided she absolutely didn't care. Very bewildered by her response, the girl didn't understand why she was behaving so rudely. After greeting the young woman, Manuel Sieta quickly clarified that, from now on, he would help Lady Lembrecht. Introducing herself in turn, Lisbeth decided that she was also an assistant, and, since he was younger than Genesía, she would treat him like a subordinate. But in the hero's opinion, since both were assistants, they should treat each other formally. Having heard about Lord Lopez Sieta's impeccable manners, the girl couldn't say the same about his younger brother. Manuel thought that if she wanted to establish ties with the Sieta family, she would have better luck with his brother, as it was easier to get along with him. Besides, it must be etched in stone that the lord must be treated with respect. With her teeth clenched in anger, Lispel was polite to that unfortunate man only because he was from the Sieta family. On top of that, she's been eating terribly lately. And Genesía dares to stuff herself like that. Looking at her friend with a smile, she thought that with that diet she would easily gain weight. Deciding that the best thing was to eat salad, she emptied the contents of her plate onto hers. At first, she thought of keeping it for herself, but she was willing to share it with her friend. At that moment, a knife flew past her and stuck into the table, horrifying Lisbeth. Observing her behavior, the protagonist was completely disappointed in the Kendall family. From now on, they must know that leftovers were always only given to the slaves. Therefore, they decided to leave the food for the lady on the table and go snack in the laboratory. Upon leaving, Manuel decided that Lisbeth must learn how to behave in society. After grabbing some sandwiches, they sat at the table in the laboratory, and the hero apologized for his lack of control over his words. Moreover, he discovered that the heroine had proposed marriage to the second prince because of who he is. He felt ashamed and hurt for not being someone she could ask for help. Therefore, the hero decided to do everything possible for her to make a deal with His Highness. Sometime later, Manuel delivered the last report on the surveillance carried out to his lord. He managed to find out that Genesía wants to reject Prince Xavier before he proposes marriage to her. As for the hero, he had known her since the academy and considered Lady Lembrecht a wonderful person inside and outside. Besides all the mages, Manuel respected Genesía more than anyone. The second prince was impressed with these serenades, hoping that reality would match them. Just at that moment, a maid entered with a bang, bringing wine to His Highness. Behind her, a knife was hidden, while the ring on Callion's finger began to glow crimson. Remembering the heroine's words, he immediately ordered Manuel to close all the doors. Upon also hearing that they had a mercenary, the maid was completely bewildered. Unsheathing his sword with a smile, the prince also ordered Genesía to be notified that their deal was done, and he would visit her soon. Lisbeth was always the center of attention, while everyone considered the heroine a piece of trash. Taking advantage of this, she looked even more beautiful next to her friend and received much love and gifts. Genesía also gave her any magical object. All she had to do was ask for it. Once, the girl hinted to her friend about a new atelier she had opened near the Lembrecht mansion. A few days later, Lisbeth received a large number of new dresses from her as a gift. She fervently believed that the protagonist was completely useless before she appeared. But now she had gone too far, and the girl didn't intend to remain so lenient. It was no longer enough for Lisbeth to snatch Prince Xavier away from her. Now she wanted to go further. She intended to take everything from her friend so that she would have no choice but to crawl back to her. Upon learning that Manuel Sieta had become Genesía's assistant, the prince was very perplexed. He didn't understand. Had the protagonist changed her mind about him because of another man? But he didn't care, as no insignificant aristocrat compared to his real person. Therefore, now he wanted to hear all the news again, to reconsider everything and start acting. Meanwhile, upon learning that His Highness Calion had accepted the deal, Genesía was absolutely delighted. She thought that without Manuel she surely wouldn't have succeeded, but he was sure that it was her ring that had pleased the prince. Upon hearing the knock on the door, they were sure it was the second prince, but suddenly, a voice announced the arrival of Prince Xavier, who wished to see Lady Lembrecht. Not understanding why he was there, the protagonist was shocked by his sudden visit. She went to meet him, while a crowd gathered wondering what bride were they talking about. Genesía couldn't be his fiancée, unless she had put a love filter in his tea. After greeting His Highness, the protagonist wanted to know what was the reason for his visit. To her astonishment, Xavier, instead of answering, knelt down and stared fixedly into her eyes. Extending a small box with a ring, he wanted to propose marriage to the protagonist. Upon hearing his promise to make her happy, a shiver ran through Genesía's whole body. Feeling dizzy, she didn't understand why everything was happening so suddenly. Back then, his words were the same, and she gave herself completely. And even more. But in the end, Xavier got rid of her mercilessly, breaking her heart and soul. And now, she could not accept His Highness's ring, since she only wished to marry for love. Completely stunned by such words, the prince opened wide eyes at Genesía. The protagonist decided to clarify that not only did she not love him, but the prince's love was also not sincere. Calmly starting to turn away, she hoped he wouldn't do such things again, which made Xavier go completely mad. Deciding he should not try to belittle his feelings for her, the prince already knew about her secret lover. Quite perplexed by his words, she understood absolutely nothing, but according to Lisbeth, she must have staged that farce. The young woman, just like His Highness, knew what Lady Lembrecht was doing behind the prince's back. And as her friend, she couldn't remain silent any longer. Upon hearing that she was sneaking around with the Lord's brother and deceiving the decent Xavier, Genesía was very disconcerted. The crowd instantly judged her for her double romance, supporting Lisbeth. They didn't understand that men only found things in her and yearned for her punishment. The false friend wanted apologies, but she loved another and they were already engaged. Moreover, Prince Xavier never courted her. How can you betray someone who was nothing to you? His Highness begged for a chance, calling that courtship madness. Xavier, driven mad, roared and raised his hand against the shameless woman. Kalyan blocked the blow and demanded an explanation from his stepbrother for his attack. How dared that idiot touch his fiancée? Xavier was perplexed. Considering the prince a beast, he remembered his month of conquering Embrek without success. Upon learning of the harassment of his fiancée, Kalyan became furious and lunged at the prince. Terrified of his stepbrother, Xavier demanded that the heroine explain herself once and for all. Approaching her, the second prince also wanted Genesía to reveal their first meeting to everyone. Specifically, she had to show the ring and name him in front of the entire crowd present. Understanding that she had no other choice, the heroine believed she had to overcome this small obstacle. Showing the ring to everyone, she pretended they had met in Cedric's class. And Kalyan declared his love for her that same day. According to him, it was true love at first sight, and fate itself had brought them together in that exact spot. Xavier was so shocked by what he heard that it even affected the quality of his drawing. How awful! The equally ungraceful Lisbeth was stunned that this heartless brute had fallen in love at first sight. Kalyan himself remained completely unfazed, conveying with his whole being that this is how it happened. Later, sitting across from him in the carriage, Genesía expressed her sincere gratitude to His Royal Highness. It turns out Manuel warned her just in time, and the second prince arrived immediately. Furthermore, they agreed to use the familiar, too, so the protagonist could call him by name. Now they were heading to the Lembrecht mansion to collect her things and then together to the Winter Palace. Genesía was very surprised by his words. She didn't understand the reason for all this. Then, the hero reminded her of the promise to protect him from every assassination attempt. This, in turn, means they will spend this whole year together. The protagonist, of course, perfectly remembered her promise, but saw no need for this. In response, Kalyan decided to ask her if she knew when people usually let their guard down. Without a second thought, she decided that happens during lunchtime. But according to the second prince, that happens while sleeping, so Genesía must protect him precisely at that moment. Knowing they would sleep in the same bed and under the same blanket, she knew it could only mean one thing. Therefore, the protagonist decided to immediately clarify. What would happen if she hogged the blanket while sleeping? Completely stunned by her question, Kalyan wanted to know if she was hiding an ace up her sleeve. But he didn't expect to hear anything about the blanket. Smiling thoughtfully, he considered his fiancée much more interesting than he had initially thought. He was also convinced of the veracity of the report, which stated that she was a brilliant mage. Though clumsy in everything else, deciding to return to the discussion, he remembered that the wife of a royal member must master poetry, history, and philosophy. She must also be an expert swordswoman, an excellent writer, and deeply familiar with protocol. In general, she had to measure up to the imperial family. And since her arrival at the Winter Palace, Genesía would begin her training. They used this as an excuse to take her there. But for the protagonist, everything she heard was too unfamiliar. However, Kalyan considered her the most intelligent mage in the entire empire, so she would master everything in a matter of days. Knowing that he was just trying to encourage her, Genesía decided to try her best. According to the prince, they needed to communicate more freely so that people would believe they were crazy about each other. Soon they arrived at the gates of the Lembrecht mansion, where the butler was already waiting for them. To the heroine's great astonishment, Kalyan was going to accompany his fiancée to the house. Exiting the carriage with him, she imagined Lance's face when he found out everything. Once outside, the hero carefully extended his hand, wishing for her to take it. Blushing with embarrassment, Genesía took his hand and the prince respectfully led her forward. Seeing this scene, Lance was frozen with shock, unable to believe what he was seeing. Entering the house, the heroine pulled him aside, and after the explanations, she expected him to help pack. They didn't have much time, and the butler wanted to give her something. It was a list of 105 mages, chosen by the magic tower, that Lady Lambrish fervently desired. In ardor, they requested more funds to thoroughly examine 3 mages from that list. The investigation was crucial. Trusting the Ardor Guild completely, Genesía ordered them to allocate more funds and relay that she herself would give them a bonus. Lance obediently accepted the order, but he couldn't comprehend. What was the real purpose of all this? It turns out their mistress simply decided to be herself. And now, oh surprise, she was the fiancée of the second prince. But she also longs to be a member of the magic tower, and once everything is over, she will dedicate her life to magic. A noble dream. The butler had already noticed a change in her, but now it was undeniable. Something had blossomed. Her dear mistress had transformed into a beautiful and radiant young woman, a sight worthy of admiration. At the same time, he clearly understood that not everything would be easy, that sometimes she would stumble upon obstacles. That's life. Sometimes problems must resolve themselves, and Genesía no longer wanted to take the easy road. A new course is coming. That same evening, the carriage with the heroes arrived without incident at the gates of the Winter Palace. They were received by the personal assistant of His Highness and head butler, one Rupert Bolton. After solemnly greeting the distinguished guest, he pierced her with a penetrating gaze. This caught the heroine off guard, who didn't expect anything like that and became completely confused. According to the prince, from that moment on, Rupert would be her personal assistant. After ordering the butler to show her around, Kalyan also wanted her to start giving her lessons tomorrow. Genesía already suspected that Rupert detested her, but she confirmed it upon seeing mountains of books on the table. He expected the heroine not to stay silent if problems arose. And moreover, he would always be willing to inform the lord about her. In the past, they had treated Genesía even worse, and that didn't scare her. But why that hostility from the very first moment? Does he, like everyone else, despise her just for being a bastard? Remembering that in a year their paths with the prince would separate, she decided to find out if the butler was overstepping. It turns out the hero still didn't trust the lady, as not everyone knows about the attempts against His Highness. So, Genesía understood that she was not the problem. She was simply worried about Kalyan. Apparently, His Highness had the affection of many, many people. Understanding his doubts, the protagonist would have acted exactly the same in his place. But now she needs the prince, and sincerely wishes him a long and happy life. Moreover, she promised to strive while she was there, so Genesía will show off starting now. She firmly decided not to leave the study until she had learned all those books. After several hours of hard work, her soul almost left her exhausted body. While the butler was in shock, the protagonist was immensely happy to have answered everything. Deciding to rest a bit before the other classes, she still didn't know where her room was. In the end, the prince arrived personally, and taking the sleeping beauty in his arms. He took her to his bedroom. Upon waking up and seeing him, she was very surprised, while Kalyan thought she was too tired. Thinking it was a dream, Genesía memorized 40 books and in fact was exhausted. Deciding that Rupert had overdone the training, the hero planned to teach him a lesson. But suddenly, the heroine defended the butler, who was simply very worried about his master. The prince still didn't know how she knew about the attacks, and apparently, she knew about his request for help from the Ministry of Magic. Finding herself in his bed, Genesía greatly envied Kalyan, whom so many people cared for. The heroine decided that if someone treated her like that, she would be in bliss, completely happy. Tucking her in with the blanket and taking off her glasses, the hero noticed for the first time how beautiful the lady was. At breakfast, the prince observed his fiancée and ordered Manuel to relieve her so she could have the day off. He knew she had worked late the previous night and believed a rest would do her wonders. When she clarified that she would cancel the appointment with the tailor, she received a questioning look. Suddenly, she remembered that, according to Rupert, the tailor was supposed to visit her today as part of her training. Kalyan decided that, being engaged to a prince, she should dress according to her position. Evoking past mockery, she recalled out loud that she had never been interested in fashion. The hero was very surprised by her reaction. Thinking he had said something inappropriate, he immediately apologized for his clumsiness, assuring her that he didn't think she had bad taste. Genesía didn't plan to express those thoughts, but they escaped unintentionally, and now she felt uncomfortable. Despite the rumors about the terrible second prince, Kalyan turned out to be very kind and considerate. The protagonist knew he wasn't the type to embarrass someone on purpose. Later, they met two dressmakers who cheerfully greeted the young woman. In their boutique, they only make refined and elegant handmade dresses. And the shop is the best in the empire. It was a great honor for the ladies to show the protagonist some of their work. And they took her to the brought dresses. Meanwhile, Rupert brought his lord some important documents that needed urgent review. Understanding that he was busy, Genesía followed the ladies to the fitting room. The huge fitting room was full of elegant outfits, expensive shoes, and sparkling accessories. Surrounding the protagonist on all sides, the dressmakers began taking measurements at lightning speed. Moreover, with her permission, they rushed to take off the young woman's glasses. Seeing her eyes without glasses, the ladies considered the lady a rough diamond, whose sight needed urgent healing. Completely confused, Genesía had never received compliments of such magnitude. After a short wait, the ladies presented the heroine to His Highness, apologizing for the delay. The lady's amethyst eyes perfectly complemented her seafoam green dress. That image deeply impressed Kalyan's soul, becoming the seed of ardent love. Not understanding His Highness's silence, Genesía's vision blurred without her glasses. The dressmakers were more astonished than anyone. They didn't need to try hard to beautify her. Deciding to try on another dress, Kalyan soon contemplated a completely new angelic image. After another change of clothes, the dressmakers couldn't understand how everything could suit one person so well. After several more dresses, the heroine couldn't take it anymore and decided to end the fitting. Then, the prince decided to buy all the dresses, even those she hadn't tried on. Befuddling the butler, Rupert remembered that His Highness had never been interested in expensive clothes or trinkets. Genesía saw no need for so many dresses. Would they even look good on her? Kalyan smiled, thinking that absolutely everything suited her wonderfully. Very flushed, the heroine remembered that he seemed busy with something. It turns out the hero planned to take care of certain matters before the tournament. Hearing this, she remembered that it was the Empire's most popular biennial festival. That time, due to the assassination attempt on Kalyan, Eugen, the first prince, won. Nia came in second. But the most surprising thing was that Xavier took third place. Genesía felt curious. Who decides the order of the tournament competitions? Moreover, she thought the explosion was an accident. But what if someone wanted to harm the second prince? Upon learning that all the princes would draw lots by age, she decided to participate for him. It was all about protecting him. And seeing her, Kalyan was willing to entrust his life to his fiancé. It turned out it was today, and she, along with the prince, headed to the main palace. Walking down the corridor, she didn't understand why the Imperial Central Palace was so terribly cold. According to the second prince, that cold was magical, necessary to slow down the decomposition of bodies. He decided they would leave as soon as the drawing was over. And Genesía completely agreed. It turned out all the other princes had already arrived, waiting in the hall. Upon entering, they saw the third Prince Vikas, the fifth Prince Sezen, and the first Prince Eugen. Moreover, the fourth Prince Xavier was also present, who immediately stared fixedly at the newcomers. Holding hands and approaching calmly, the protagonist felt strong tension in the air. Seeing her confusion, Kalyan looked at his fiancée with understanding. Wishing to protect her at all costs. After cheerfully greeting his dear brother, Eugen was also happy to see his fiancée. He decided that the hero's taste in women had changed, and his current fiancée was much more boring than Lady Tarek. Genesía didn't understand why he was staring at her, while the first prince thought perhaps something was escaping them. Tired of his antics, Kalyan grabbed his brother's head and slammed it against the floor with all his might. Eugen seems to have completely forgotten how much the hero hates it when someone from his people is insulted. While the first prince was recovering from the shock, Vika angrily jumped up from his seat, starting to yell at Kalyan. Looking at him fiercely, the second prince ordered him to control his tongue. Paralyzed by his gaze, both princes fell silent, scared stiff, turning white as paper. Watching them leave, Xavier laughed at those cretins who had provoked Kalyan themselves. After a deep sigh and looking at the second prince, doesn't Eugen realize who he is messing with? Thanks to this man, the heroine was able to leave the Ministry of Magic without the slightest fuss. Suddenly, feeling his fixed gaze, the fourth prince shuddered from head to toe. Meanwhile, with the first and third absent, the chamberlain decided to choose a card for them. But Genesía decided to participate in the drawing instead of her husband as well. The servant didn't like the idea at all, but he had no choice but to invite her to the table with a smile. On the table were several cards defining the order of the ball, and one had to be chosen. Reaching out towards the table, the heroine discreetly used magic to see them all. To her great surprise, all the cards turned out to be absolutely identical. Remembering that the explosion will happen during the ball, and understanding that everything is planned, she decided which card to choose. But when she touched them, snap, she swept them off the table unintentionally. At that moment, the chamberlain's face distorted with terror and he froze. Staring at him with a smile, Genesía was horrified by how clumsy she was. Almost all the cards turned over and everyone saw their numbers, and the silence became dense. The servant was completely disoriented, and the heroine thought there was something fishy going on. Looking at her in panic, the chamberlain thought, someone definitely set me up. Surprised by what she heard, Genesía didn't even hint that he had arranged the cards that way. She knew someone had enough power to even bribe the court chamberlain. And that someone was none other than the first Prince Eugen, the Empress's heir. The heroine observed him closely and he thought, suspecting me is like suspecting the prince. Removing the blindfold from his eye, the third Prince Sezen ordered the chamberlain to stop lying, as it was useless against his magic. The young hero's Eye of Truth was a third-level sacred artifact and could unmask any lie. Actually, it wasn't entirely true, and the servant hoped the young prince would kindly spare his jokes. Knowing that Caesar used a rather popular toy, a cunning plan formed in Genesía's mind. Expressing her deep respect for this sacred relic, she hoped His Highness would allow her to use it for a while. Putting the blindfold on his eye, she pretended she could see everything now and that it was truly a legendary artifact. Making everything up on the spot, she supposedly saw a huge shield behind the chamberlain. adorned with petals, knowing that a similar shield was on Prince Eugen's coat of arms. Everyone concluded that he had interfered. Not understanding how she could have found out everything, the servant began to suspect that the toy really worked. Falling to his knees before the lady, the chamberlain sincerely hoped they wouldn't report him to His Majesty. Unsheathing his sword, the second prince decreed that his fiancée must return to the Winter Palace. Deciding to leave the servant with his fiancée, the heroine hurried out of the hall. Later, she arrived at the Winter Palace Conservatory to clear her head a bit and think everything over. Everything was too easy, but the switched cards would give Eugen an advantage, although an explosion is useless to him. Because of this, Genesía felt that something important was slipping through her fingers. Suddenly appearing in front of her, Manuel cheerfully greeted the heroine. He suspected she would want to return to work immediately, so he decided to warn her that the Ministry of Magic was in chaos. Genesía immediately thought Lisbeth had done something again, but the problem was something else. Moreover, the girl immediately switched to another faculty after that incident. The hero was much more worried about the journalists Lady Terk had set loose against the Ministry of Magic. She is Prince Callion's ex-fiancée, and it seems she holds a grudge. The protagonist understood that the woman wasn't entirely wrong, but she was still irritating. Lady Terek hopes to destroy the second prince's reputation before the investiture ceremony. If Genesía returns to work, all the reporters will harass her and rumors will fly. Furthermore, she will undoubtedly meet Callion's ex-fiancé at the investiture ceremony. Thanking Manuel for the information, she decided to prepare thoroughly for it. She also found out that, fortunately, Cedric was in a very good mood. Before this, Genesía thought he was heartbroken by Lisbeth's switch to another faculty. It seemed to her that the court mage had hidden feelings for the lady. But perhaps it is not so. Knowing it would be a bit out of place, the hero also wanted to clarify something about the investiture ceremony. Completely red with embarrassment, Manuel wished to invite the heroine to dance. He knew the second prince would invite her to the first dance, but he hoped that, in the end, she would have the energy to dance with him. Seeing that no one else was inviting her, Genesía understood perfectly, as she also couldn't dance with anyone at her graduation. That time, Lisbeth showed her false compassion when she herself received tons of invitations. But according to her friend, she didn't have to worry. After all, she was Xavier's fiancée. Not wanting him to suffer too, the heroine joyfully accepted the invitation. Moreover, she was determined to perfect her dancing skills. In practice, dancing was harder than in theory, and Genesía regretted not having attended more events. Practicing that same night, she accidentally twisted her ankle and started to fall. A second later, she was in Callion's arms, who appeared out of nowhere. Seeing that she was rushing too much, the hero took her by the waist and invited her to dance. Following his advice, the protagonist suddenly realized she was starting to get it. She was very afraid of embarrassing the second prince at the ceremony with her clumsy moves. In exchange for silence about the card change, the chamberlain convinced the emperor to draw new ones. Furthermore, Eugen asked his mother to send a personal gift to Genesía. This means that if someone dares to ridicule the protagonist at the ceremony, they will insult the empress. Callion did everything possible so that his fiancée would simply enjoy the celebration. The eve of the celebration, he healed her sight with magic, and afterwards those dressmakers arrived. This time, Genesía wanted them to apply makeup to her until she was unrecognizable. That night a ball was held. As a prelude to the tournament, Xavier was glad that Callion exposed Eugen's deceit, because in exchange for silence, the first prince decided to do a favor for each of them. Suddenly, he saw the second prince enter the banquet hall with Genesía. He and all the other guests were stunned by the young woman's majesty. Empress Teodora was also impressed by her elegance and congratulated the heroine on her appearance. When turning her gaze to her majesty, Genesía shuddered in terror. The emperor possessed no magic, but he looked much younger than he was and exuded a creepy aura. Turning her towards him, Callion wanted her to relax and lean on him. They began to dance, and soon the heroine felt her heels were too high. The hero expected her to sit down after the ball, but the young woman had already arranged to dance with Manuel. So he placed her on his feet and decided she could completely relax and just pretend to dance. They were too close now, and Genesía feared Kalyan could hear her racing heart. Watching their dance, the guests decided this couple should be sent straight to the altar. Meanwhile, Lisbeth stood aside, watching them with envy and grinding her teeth. Her friends Meg and Selena were also in shock from such audacity and decided to help her. The ladies decided to take care of the heroine when she went to the dressing room, and Lisbeth could divert Kalyan's attention to herself. Before, people thought the emperor forced the second prince and the sorceress out. But it seems those rumors were lies. Suddenly, the heroine heard the ladies whispering that she was simply using Kalyan. Like Xavier. Seizing the initiative, other ladies decided that at the academy, Genesía was a heartbreaker. And surely, the second prince took her by force. Approaching them to clarify, she suddenly saw Selena in the middle of the crowd. In her past life, she, Meg, and Lisbeth spared no effort to harass the heroine at the academy. But now, Genesía was not going to allow them to humiliate Kalyan. First, she would clarify that the fourth prince, Xavier, meant nothing to her. Moreover, she loves the second prince, who proposed to her. With those rumors, Selena offends both of them, so she better watch out. Genesía expected an answer, but the lady simply turned around and left. Knowing she did it for him, the hero was stunned by her unpredictability. Looking at Xavier, he saw bitter hatred and intense jealousy in his eyes. Seeing that they still believed in the romance, Kalyan would return the favor with a kiss on her curls. Trying to calm her heart at all costs, Genesía decided to go to the dressing room. As soon as she entered, Meg and Selena greeted her with excitement. Suspicious. In her past life, during the academy, they found out through Lisbeth that she had slandered them behind their backs. Genesía never did such a thing, but the ladies didn't believe her and continued to torment her mercilessly. And now, these ladies decided she could join their club of elegant nobles. In that case, the heroine wanted them to immediately offer her apologies for the past harassment. Furious at these words, Meg didn't understand how that creature who stole Lisbeth's boyfriend dared to give them orders. Before that, they learned from Lady Kendall that Genesía was only pretending to be Xavier's fiancé. And she stole her friend's boyfriend. And now they were there only to delay the heroine, while Lisbeth was courting the second prince. The heroine remembered that Lady Kendall always wanted what she had, and stopped at nothing to get it. However, this time Genesía decided she wasn't going to let her get what she wanted. With a sharp bang on the table, she knocked over all the bottles, and the wine spilled all over the room. Magical objects were forbidden at events, so Meg and Selena had nothing. Creating a huge column of fire and bringing it close to the spilled alcohol, the heroine demanded they move aside. Terrified, Selena didn't recognize the loser they knew. What had happened to her? According to Genesía, their similarity was that Lisbeth had vilely manipulated them all. But the heroine would no longer fall for it, while Meg and Selena remained her puppets. Not wanting to stand idly by, she threw a burst of fire at them. But suddenly, the fire went out. The girls were in shock, not understanding anything. Genesía could easily defeat them with magic, but she didn't want to stoop to their level. As she left, she clarified that she had never spoken about them behind their backs. Meanwhile, Manuel leaned against a tree in the garden, confused by what he saw at the banquet. Rupert approached to confirm if His Highness was in the garden and Lady Lambrish in the dressing room. He knew that the reason for the protagonist's dejection was precisely the heroine. However, Manuel serves the second prince and should not desire what belongs to his master. But the hero opposed this, since Kalyan didn't even like Genesía. At that moment, the heroine burst into the garden, leaving the boys perplexed. Upon hearing that the second prince was in danger, they all ran towards him together. Meanwhile, Kalyan met his uncle Richard and rejected his proposal. The count wanted to elevate His Highness to the throne, but the second prince only wanted to destroy the royal family once and for all. He also understood that his uncle only wanted to use him for the benefit of his own family. Pretending he genuinely wanted to help, Richard reminded him that his Highness's mother was from his family. Suddenly, Lisbeth emerged from behind a tree, her feet and the hem of her dress covered in mud. Greeting the lords respectfully, Lady Kendall had no intention of eavesdropping on their conversation. The girl looked even different in appearance from the Lisbeth Richard remembered. What might she have overheard? Actually, she hadn't heard anything. But the lady decided to pretend she had. She was willing to keep silent if Kaelan agreed to see her occasionally. However, the hero looked at her with a gaze full of contempt, which disconcerted her. Laughing nervously, she decided to clarify that she only wanted to know more about her best friend. Recently, a misunderstanding arose between them, and Lisbeth hoped His Highness would help them reconcile. At that moment, the heroes were rushing towards the second prince, and Genesía accidentally injured her leg. Suddenly, she saw an irritated Kaelan, closely followed by Lady Kendall. When their eyes met the heroine, Lisbeth wrote off Meg and Selena as useless idiots. She immediately feigned a casual encounter with the second prince. But Genesía didn't buy it. Seeing the situation slipping away, the lady tried to shed a tear to gain sympathy and blame the heroine. But against all odds, Callian went straight to his fiancée and looked at her ankle with concern. Rupert and Manuel were ordered to take them back to the palace, while Lisbeth didn't understand because no one was looking at her. Suddenly, the second prince lifted Genesía in his arms and walked towards the carriage. This is how he wanted to show Lady Kendall how much they loved each other. Seeing the furious girl, the heroine decided she didn't deserve her attention. And now, in the prince's arms, she felt terribly embarrassed. The next day, Genesía was still mentally processing everything that had happened the night before. Callian made her feel quite uneasy. She felt like he was investing more in their relationship. Rupert, sitting opposite her, clarified that the second prince would compete last, and that she could rest at the palace. Xavier, furious about the drawing, didn't understand how his father had allowed this. Before, the emperor gave him a magic amulet that activates offensive magic and empowers the user. But the fourth prince didn't expect that, in the drawing, he would be matched in the same round as Callian. His right-hand man, Jade Weissman, suggested he take care in the tournament. He was His Majesty's favorite. The assistant, on the other hand, was shocked by Xavier's immaturity and capriciousness. A while later, Genesía decided to inspect the tournament arena. Upon seeing in the leaflet that the second and fourth princes would be in the same round, she was extremely surprised. In her previous life, when the explosion happened, both were in the same group. How was that possible? It was a gigantic explosion. And to cause such a thing, a complex magic rune and a powerful magic source are needed. Suddenly, she heard a familiar voice behind her, ready to help the young lady. It was none other than Jade Weissman, who was not only Xavier's right-hand man, but also a self-proclaimed boy. And a cheater. Upon learning that Genesía wanted to inspect the arena, he offered to give her a tour and help her get into the stadium. As soon as they entered the arena, the girl began to thoroughly examine the entire environment, which left him perplexed. Suddenly, she discovered under the stone slabs magic destruction stones, enough for an explosion. But the magic rune was still missing. The guarding knights could not tolerate such audacity and demanded she stop touching everything immediately. It turned out they were allowed in thanks to Jade's connections, but they could be arrested for damaging property. Upon leaving, they heard the furious shouts of the arena fighters, who didn't understand how they could lose to a child. The boy replied that they were all simply losers, which further enraged the guys. Lord Weissman decided to ignore him, but the heroine could not stand idly by. Approaching the ruffians, she decided they should be ashamed of their attitude. The boys didn't want trouble with the noblewoman and fled. Genesía discovered that the boy was named Nia Nocturne. Observing him closely, she remembered that this very hero came in second in the tournament in her past life. Knowing he was surely scared by the bullies, the heroine decided to take him home. Deciding to forgive her in gratitude for the rescue, Nia quickly clarified that he was a dragon, and centuries older than her. Later, buying him an ice cream, she discovered that the hero was looking for his dolls. The elders of the magic tower promised to help him, but upon breaking their oath, Nia cut ties with them. The heroine could not believe that they used dragons for their own purposes. She was the first to help them without asking for anything in return, and because of this, the dragon decided to confide in her. Moreover, Nia could see magic, and just by looking at Genesía, he knew she was a kind sorceress. And very powerful. Astonished by such ability, she hoped the dragon could help her find the rune in the arena. After gaining his consent, she took him to the Winter Palace, hoping Nia would be allowed to stay there. Rupert's brother, who recently lost a battle against this boy, was in shock at this turn of events. The hero himself was happy about the girl's arrival, as His Highness couldn't wait to show off his skills in front of her. The second prince was very disconcerted by the fact that she had managed to become friends with this guy. Sighing heavily, he decided that she had forgotten about the tournament because she was having fun. Thinking he was upset because she wasn't fulfilling her contractual obligations, Genesía decided to be more careful from now on. Very embarrassed by his words, the hero wasn't referring to that at all. Suddenly, the dragon took a liking to the red-eyed prince, who was also dying. Nia saw an object in his heart and understood that no normal person could exist like that, jumping up suddenly and unsheathing his sword. How dare that brat say that? But upon seeing the heroine's look, he put away his weapon and decided they should chat a bit. He discovered that Genesía saw in the boy many aspects that she herself possessed. She was simply interested in talking about magic with someone who loved it as much as she did. Moreover, with him, she felt for the first time that she had a true friend. So the second prince ordered a room prepared for him and decided that if Nia misbehaved, she would be responsible. Genesía was delighted with what she heard, thanking Kalyan and considering him very kind. The next day, alone with the dragon, she hoped he would help her in her search for the explosion activator. Also, the heroine wondered what object in the second prince's heart was talked about yesterday. It turns out it was a stone created by the dragon Joan, with the ability to restore. According to Nia, Kalyan died once, but this object brought him back to life. But dragons don't like to share their creations, so the hero believes it was stolen. The dolls he was looking for, made by his mother, were also stolen. At that time, he didn't know much about humans. He trusted the elders of the magic tower, but they deceived him. Genesía now understands that, in her previous life, Eugen also used Nia to win the tournament. Therefore, she now decides to offer him protection and guarantee the return of his dolls. The dragon, perceiving that the heroine is different from other humans, accepts the proposal. Immediately afterward, they head to the stadium, where the tournament is already in full swing. The VIP room is well protected, and according to the guards, only royalty can enter. Genesía was sure that, as the second prince's fiancée, she had every right to enter. The soldiers at the entrance didn't believe her, but fortunately, Jade unexpectedly came out through the doors. Confirming her words to the guards, Xavier's assistant hoped he had been helpful to the heroine. His hair and aura reminded the heroine of Alice Bell, and she didn't like that at all. Nia rushed forward, hoping to quickly find the necessary magic artifact. Bursting into the room and stopping in front of the emperor, the dragon covered his nose due to the stench. Entering behind him, Genesía greeted the son of the empire with respect. Giving him an indifferent look, His Majesty turned around and continued watching the tournament. The young woman was very surprised that he looked even younger than in their previous encounter. Meanwhile, Nia could no longer control his gagging. All magic was unique and different, just like the personalities of each person. The dragon sensed the heroine's magic, warm, as if it were the sun itself. Inside the emperor, tons of magic types were rotting, and that smell sickened Nia. Suddenly, the start of the stage, where Kalyan was supposed to participate, was announced. The hero managed to scan the entire stadium, and many were carrying explosive objects. There weren't many capable of creating so many magic artifacts at once. And the second prince was certainly the target. The dragon decided to ask, did she really love that red-haired man with crimson eyes? Thinking he meant love in general, she replied that she cared for all her friends, including him. Nia noticed she was looking everywhere for a magic object for the prince. Was it really worth it? The heroine wanted to clarify that they were bound by a contract. But why weren't those words coming out? Actually, she wanted to be with Callion as much as possible, even after the contract was broken. He was the kindest person she had ever met, and he sincerely cared for her. The hero didn't impress the dragon, but if Genesía valued him so much, he was willing to help. Touching the heroine's head with one finger, Nia gave her the ability to see the world with dragon eyes and use his magic. Meanwhile, thanks to the stone obtained, Xavier won the preliminary competitions without issues. However, that object had a limit on uses, and the hero decided to save it for now. Seeing Genesía on one of the balconies, he was happy. Thinking she had come to watch him, following her gaze, he realized in horror that she was looking at Callion. The second prince didn't understand why she had gone there. There was still a long time until his turn. Suddenly, the fourth prince decided to challenge him right there. And if he won, he would keep the heroine. Callion erupted in fury. Genesía was not an object to be won. Determined to teach him to respect women, he accepted Xavier's challenge. The heroine looked at the stone on the fourth prince's collar with horror. It shone brighter and filled him with power. Noticing her gaze, Xavier rejoiced. He would win back Genesía and fulfill his majesty's will. He launched a furious attack against the second prince, but he dodged it calmly. Seeing how he clung to the necklace with the stone, Callion understood. His opponent was cheating. The heroine heard Nia say that that necklace would cause the explosion of the magic stones. But she knew it was a gift from His Majesty, handmade by the mages of the tower. Meanwhile, tired of searching for the opponent's weaknesses, Callion decided to finish him. The fourth prince was exhausted and knew he was going to lose the fight, so he decided to ask. Did the hero realize who the protagonist had been looking at all this time? Xavier thought she still loved him and was only using the second prince to make him jealous. He also remembered that it was impossible for Callion to know what love was because he killed his own mother. At that very moment, the blade of the hero's sword grazed him, cutting his face. And the stone. Trembling with pain and fear, the fourth prince hoped his half-brother wouldn't kill him in front of the public. Looking at Genesía, Callion understood they had a contract, and Xavier's words shouldn't torment him. But inside, everything was burning. Suddenly, magic circles appeared everywhere, and the protagonist jumped from the balcony straight towards the second prince. Holding her tightly in his arms, he wondered, at what exact moment had he started to feel something for her? Immediately after, a gigantic roar echoed. The protagonist used dragon magic and created barriers around them, thanks to which they suffered no harm. The earth absorbed all the magic from the Xavier stone, and the explosion was even greater than expected. With a sad look at Genesía, Callion decided she shouldn't risk herself like that for the contract. Smiling in response, she would protect him, even without an agreement. A week passed, and by order of the emperor, they stopped looking for the culprit and covered up the case. Moreover, since then, the protagonists feel awkward around each other. Meanwhile, Rupert ran into Nia and decided to give him a task. He handed over His Highness's money, and the dragon had to take Genesía for a walk. Soon they found themselves in the middle of a bustling market. Seeing a huge black shop, Nia decided to enter. It turned out the place belonged to a witch selling her potions. Until now, the heroine had only read about this in books. It was an incredible find. Upon discovering that one of the bottles contained a love potion, she decided to buy it yes. Another buyer wanted the same thing, but Genesía was faster and snatched it from her. Suddenly, the stranger recognized the heroine. It was Lady Belouise Tarek, Callion's ex-fiancée. Later, in a coffee shop, she remembered when she woke up and discovered she was the second prince's fiancée. Her father sold her to gain the empress's trust, so she herself went to see His Highness with a proposal. By handing over her father's secret book, Lady Tarek obtained protection and the option to break the engagement. All this time she hid in Rupert's house, and today she was leaving Geron when she ran into the heroes. Since things turned out this way, she hoped Genesía wouldn't refuse to give her the love potion. The heroine took it only out of curiosity and didn't plan to use it on Callian. So she gladly accepted. But Beluis flatly refused. It was more romantic to conquer someone than to get them drunk, she thought. After her departure, the protagonists returned to the Winter Palace. Finding her at the entrance, the second prince hoped Genesía would dedicate a moment to him. He remembered Xavier's words that she still felt something for him. His Highness knew that the fourth prince was just provoking him, but he noticed the heroine's gaze towards him. Now he wanted to apologize for those words about the contract, spoken in a fit of pique. Genesía remembered B. Louis, who saw her run towards the prince in the arena and thought she was only saving C. Siamese. Smiling, she gladly accepted his apologies, thanking him for the ring he had given her. Shortly after, a servant of the emperor unexpectedly appeared, inviting Lady Lembrecht for an audience with His Majesty. In front of the throne room doors, she felt terrible and unknown magic, as well as a cold that pierced to the bone. Upon seeing her, the emperor wanted to know what magic the heroine had used in the arena. But His Majesty knew from the minister that no one could release so much magic. Genesía insisted that it was just a simple defense spell. And as for what was strange, the magic was almost inexplicably fortuitous. After seating her on the sofa, the emperor suddenly decided that he liked her. He knew that not everyone could do that. Could the heroine create a temporary rune? In that case, she would become His Majesty's personal magic advisor. The emperor knew that many longed to serve him, but he did not see that desire in the gaze of Lady Lembrecht. She saw no problem. Her relationship with Callian was merely a contract. Moreover, the monarch knew that the second prince didn't have much time left. He had to let her go. After hearing this and remembering the recent events, she concluded that the emperor was behind everything. At that moment, guards' shouts echoed in the hallway, and Callian burst into the throne room. Seeing this, His Majesty ordered the execution of every soldier guarding the entrance. The emperor wanted the hero to know his place, as everyone's lives depended on him. The second prince decided that Genesía truly mattered to him. And besides, she is the only one who can send His Majesty back to the past. The father was enormously surprised and thought his son was trying to demonstrate his desire to be the successor. Laughing to himself, the emperor had previously thought he saved her because he truly loved her. Upon learning that she was just Callian's partner, the monarch released them both and even pardoned the guard. The second prince suffered greatly, but the heroine knew he had lied to save her. The hero did want to conquer the throne and overthrow the monarchy, but he didn't plan to use Genesía for it. He had long been suspicious, but after the explosion, Callian realized that the emperor had been trying to assassinate him. Now, the empress would soon discover the hero's intention to take the throne. And the hunt against him and his subordinates would begin. Rupert, Ash, Manuel, Esok, and all of His Highness's knights knew what they were getting into. But the heroine was different. Callian didn't want her to become a target because of their fake relationship. However, Genesía was determined to go all the way and thought he should be happy. Not everyone is lucky enough to attract a mage as talented as her. Around this time, Xavier began to recover after treatment. Jade was happy that he at least survived, but the fourth prince considered his life useless, since his face was now disfigured. During the duel, he looked at Callian in horror, who suddenly got distracted by the heroine. Remembering that moment, he ran away, saving his skin. When the explosion occurred, he was lucky enough to be within the range of Genesía's barriers. The healer managed to cure him, but unfortunately, a huge scar on half his face will remain forever. Lord Wisman remembered how the emperor whipped him for not having everything go according to plan. Before that, His Majesty met with Callian and the heroine, who refused to reveal the source of that magic to him. The emperor knew that the second prince hated him since childhood and thought he also wanted to go back in time. Now he needed Genesía. And if we are to believe the Minister of Magic, she was close to Lispel Kendall. Recalling her last encounter with that young, blonde lady, Lord Weissman was stunned. She came from a family of sorcerers who used to live in Avalantes, where Hyde was also from. Therefore, the emperor decided to assign this task to him. But the Lord wanted to avoid meeting someone from the Kendall family at all costs. They were the most powerful family in the entire region, and their distinguishing feature was their golden hair. Many years ago, Jade and his family were his slaves. Social status in the empire is everything, and slaves were treated like garbage. One day, the young hero brought food home and discovered that his mother was missing a leg. Looking at his little sister, Ruby, he knew it was surely because of her. Apparently, Mom promised to give her anything she wanted, and the little girl wished for one of Lady Lisbeth's ribbons. Ruby thought her mother was too stupid to get caught and lose a leg. Jade fled immediately after that, hoping never to run into the Kendalls again. Then there was a terrible fire in which only Lisbeth survived, and Mom and Ruby surely died. Meanwhile, Lady Kendall was furious that everyone only cared about that ungrateful creature. Lisbeth decided that she was the one who should be the center of attention now. Suddenly, she received a visit from a guest from the Ministry of Magic. Believing it was Genesía begging for forgiveness, the girl ran to the door. Opening the door eagerly, she was surprised to see Lord Windsor. Back on the sofa, Lady Kendall wanted to know what brought him there. Handing her a bouquet of flowers, the professor felt strange. It was his first relationship. Not understanding anything, Lisbeth remembered that she needed a letter of recommendation from him. Hearing condemnation everywhere, she vented to the Lord, hoping for his compassion. She thought that if he helped her with the transfer, maybe they could get to know each other better. And now, the hero arrived ready to fulfill all her dreams. Then, the girl remembered Kesher's secret auction. An invitation costs 20 million. She decided that if the Lord loved her, they would go together and she would buy him a necklace. Time later, Rupert handed Genesía a package from his butler. It was a list of 105 mages from the Magic Tower, and the heroine wanted to find their leader. The Ardor Guild could not identify him, and she decided to ask Nier about it. According to the dragon, the leader of the mages was Kaon Singrir, who was as cunning as a fox. Genesía remembered that in her past life, they also called him the con man of the magic mine. Many invested their money in his project, and he used it to buy everything at Kesher's auction. Wishing to meet him, she discovered that Manuel's family knew the organizers of this auction well. Later, upon learning of her intentions through his people, didn't the emperor understand why she wanted information about the Magic Tower? Upon discovering that she planned to move there after her contract ended, he understood that Genesía just wanted to live in peace. They also relayed information that the White Knights could be found in the streets of Rilsan, the Magic Academy, and Kesher's secret auction. Knowing the protagonist would be there, the second prince decided to go in person. Upon leaving his office, Lady Ash learned from Rupert that His Highness felt something for Lady Lembrecht. The protagonist saw it as a problem, as she would surely persuade him to take revenge. But for the lady, it was even good. The prince would do anything to achieve his goal and protect her. Ash felt that she had something special, something capable of melting even the coldest heart. Manuel, upon hearing the conversation, was shocked to learn that Callian loved the heroine. A week later, he left for the auction in her company. Genesía didn't even imagine that her family had such connections. The protagonist inherited his magic from his mother, and his father's family always excelled in art. In fashion, thanks to their social standing, the auction master will welcome the Sayat family with open arms. The heroine understood how little she knew about Manuel, but according to him, they barely crossed paths at the academy. However, from what Genesía remembered, they never interacted. She only watched him from a distance. Then, the hero decided to ask if she remembered the local stray dog, Moku. Remembering her instantly, the girl knew he had kept the little dog. Moreover, thanks to that canine, they met in person for the first time. That time, the hero saw the student sitting with the dog in the place where she hid from everyone. By sharing food with her, Manuel discovered that she was already a higher-level student. At that time, everyone compared him to his older brother, and the hero just wanted to disappear. Petting the dog, Genesía decided that, even though her life was hell, she never thought about ending it. Not wanting to give up, she decided to love herself first. Inspired by her words, the hero gathered courage to talk to his family and clarify everything. They immediately arrived at the auction, and the man at the entrance demanded their invitations. Upon receiving them and realizing they were important guests, the man guided them down the hall. They walked quite a bit, and the mansion was much larger than it seemed at first glance. When he took out the invitations, the heroine saw a strange envelope, black with gold details. It was a family envelope, and she had a strange feeling, as if she had seen it before. Manuel remembered sending his graduation invitation in such an envelope, but she never attended. However, Genesía clearly remembered never receiving any letter. Blaming himself for not giving her the invitation in person, the hero felt he ruined her party. Meanwhile, they finally arrived at the very secret Kesher auction. With the mask on, the heroine didn't care about the graduation. But what happened to that letter? Inside the hall, there were only 4 people, not counting the presenter, and the heroine hurried to take a seat. The auction master sincerely hoped that everyone would find what they desired here. The first lot was a vase made of magical creature tusk, with a starting price of 100,000 gold. The participants began raising their paddles and stating their prices, one after another. Genesía didn't want to buy anything, she just needed someone to know she was there. The last lot was a necklace with the world's only black diamond, with a starting price of 2 million gold. Suddenly, one of the participants, who hadn't bid before, decided to offer 3 million. The heroine understood that this was the head of the magic tower, and that he only wanted to launder money. According to Manuel, she could offer any amount, as His Highness had allocated an obscene amount for the auction. Callion owns the largest magic stone mine in Jiran, so he is a very wealthy man. Genesía finally understood why he is so generous, but the hero decided that she was just an exception. Hearing the bids rising, she decided to bid 5 million, hoping it would be enough. The head mage started raising the price. And in this race, the heroine didn't notice that the bid rose to 8 million. Suddenly, Lisbeth decided to bid 20 million, and the lord sitting next to her jumped in surprise. They didn't have that much money, but she knew that at this auction, one could also pay with organs. Since the professor has 2 eyes and 2 kidneys, he might as well sell them for her. Taking off her mask, Genesía ordered him to stop using Lord Windsor and pay out of his own pocket. After suffering a strong shock, Lady Kendall didn't understand how she got there. Seeing Lord Sayado next to her, she decided that the heroine had forced him to come with her. Running to the door, Lisbeth was burning to tell the second prince that Genesía was cheating on him with another. But the protagonist decided not to judge others by her own kind, and the lord should not be deceived. Lady Kendall uses people, and then just discards them when they are no longer useful. In response, Lisbeth started yelling at her, mocking how Genesía followed her everywhere. She also remembered when someone left a letter in her locker, inviting her to the graduation party. Lady Kendall always believed the protagonist's things were hers, so she took the letter. And read it. Hearing her mock its ridiculous content, Manuel understood in horror that it was his invitation. Thinking that a loser had sent it, Lisbeth decided that Genesía should be grateful. However, instead, the protagonist slapped her with all her strength. In shock again, Lady Kendall realized that no one had ever dared to touch her. Furious, she decided to fight back. But the heroine stopped her hand with complete calm. Her dear friend wrote that letter, and Genesía wanted Lisbeth to stop belittling others' efforts. Breaking free from her grip with irritation, the lady swore to reveal the secret relationship of those two to everyone. Manuel never imagined that his feelings for the heroine would affect His Highness so devastatingly. Genesía thought people were no longer silly enough to blindly believe her inventions. Lisbeth was completely confused. At what point had she changed so much? With a maniacal smile, she decided that people don't change and always fall for rumors. Lady Kendall was sure that if she deceived Xavier, she could do the same with Callion. But Genesía already loved the second prince and trusted him completely. Suddenly, the head mage interrupted the conversation. Clarifying that the auction was over, it turns out the knight in the black cloak bought the necklace for 200 million. Lisbeth immediately started yelling at Lord Windsor, accusing him of this. Hearing her insults, Callion finally took off the mask and the black hood, deciding he would fit in well with the sailors. While everyone was in a state of shock, he approached the protagonist and extended the purchased trophy to her. It was the least he could do in gratitude for her faith. Looking at Manuel, Lady Kendall decided to take advantage of the moment and accuse Genesía of betraying His Highness. The second prince was interested in knowing what she would invent this time, as he had already understood in the garden that all her words were a simple lie. Offended by his abrupt tone, she sharply turned around and headed for the exit. Callion didn't understand who exactly allowed her to leave, but Lisbeth understood that between her and the protagonist there was just a fight, and he wouldn't do anything to her for that. But organ selling was another matter that the royal mage attempted that would harm the royalty. Aware of the gravity, the prince called the knights and ordered Lady Kendall arrested. And accomplices. Furious, she turned towards Lord Windsor, demanding help and blaming his greed for everything. The professor did not react. Lispel turned to Genesía, expecting help from her friend. But the heroine thought the girl should have answered for her actions a long time ago. Grinding her teeth in rage, the lady swore she would kill her someday for this. After her departure, Callion judged that it was dangerous and ordered the heroine to leave. He wanted to inspect the place and search for a secret passage. Underground. Determined to help, she saw a magic sphere to one side. By placing magic into it, Genesía watched a hole open in the wall. Right after was the descent, emanating a horrible yet familiar magic. Upon entering, the heroes discovered a room covered in corpses with magic stones embedded. This indicated that the Emperor's source of power was people. How many had he murdered? Callion wanted to take the protagonist with him, but she wanted to understand everything. Some time later, with the sun already high, Genesía waited for the second prince's return at the Winter Palace. Finally, he returned at night, bringing news about an auction. There were many involved in the experiments, and he even had to include the Ministry of Magic in the list of suspects. Genesía was sure the Emperor needed mages to create magic stones to absorb energy. Everyone is born with a particle of magic, and to become a mage, one must awaken. Few can do it alone, and usually the help of parents or a mentor is needed. Therefore, most mages were nobles, with resources for awakening and family knowledge. Almost no one can use magic alone, but with magic stones, anyone can cause an explosion. Most of these stones are mined, but they can also be obtained from human bodies. However, this latter method is perfect for those who want to use magic illegally and go unnoticed. Genesía suspected the Emperor, but she didn't understand why he would want to do something like that. Callion knew that his father's true desire was to achieve eternal life. According to the investigation, the Minister of Magic found the diary of a mage who discovered how to live forever. Knowing it was impossible, the heroine hesitated whether to tell Callion about her time travels. The people she trusted before betrayed her. But despite that, Genesía decided to give him a chance. Looking him in the eyes, the heroine confessed that she could travel back in time. But on that path, it is impossible to achieve eternal life. She began to think how to explain it in simple words to someone who doesn't even know how to use magic. Although the second prince didn't need explanations, he simply trusted the protagonist. Only if she didn't object, he wanted to know. Why on earth did she need to travel through time? Then, Genesía decided to tell him the whole story of how Xavier and Lisbeth betrayed her and almost burned her. Before that, Callion thought she had come to him only because she didn't want to marry the fourth prince. But now, he didn't understand how Xavier had even dared to treat her that way. The protagonist returned to take revenge. But upon seeing the guards taking Lady Kendall away, she only felt bitterness. Taking her hand, the hero decided that Genesía had a kind heart, easily hurt. And what he liked most about her was that she remained kind despite everything. Time later, the Emperor summoned the second prince to the meeting hall of the royal palace. His Majesty knew he was only going to buy a gift for his fiancée and witnessed a crime by chance. However, he flatly refused to believe such nonsense. At that moment, Kalyan remembered when he and the heroine found the secret door sealed in that dungeon. Even then, he suspected that behind it was a secret passage of the White Knights. It was the secret guard of the Emperor himself, lurking in the shadows and destroying everything. Genesía couldn't break the seal on the door and thought perhaps Nia could do it better. The hero didn't understand how a child could help, and she had to confess that, actually. She was a dragon, and now, understanding that it was still too soon to confront his majesty. The second prince decided to retreat temporarily. He remembered that everyone involved in the auction was arrested, but they hadn't been interrogated yet. Kalyan decided not to participate in the investigation in exchange for a small favor. Wanting to win over the dragon, he wanted the tournament winner's prize. The emperor was confused. Did he think he was looking for white knights and magic gems? Did he really come to the auction to buy a diamond for that shrew? There was no time. The emperor urgently needed more rejuvenating stones. Meanwhile, Genesía waited for her fiancé in the royal garden. Suddenly, she heard male voices talking about Jurin, his Highness's cousin. Jurin Schutener approached Lady Lembrecht. Only the insecure talk behind someone's back. In the lessons for the future fiancé, she learned that his Highness was Schutener through his mother. Lord Richard Schutener was the Count Palatine, and Jurin was his son. Unbelievable. And now Genesía was happy to meet the prince's cousin. Just as she remembered, they suddenly saw Kalyan, who was already heading towards them. Smiling sincerely, Jurin hoped his Highness was well. The second prince, with a grim face, began to examine his cousin. Looking at his sick leg, he understood that the hero had not recovered. Deciding he would visit the duke later, Kalyan started to leave, calling Genesía. Running after him, she agreed on the spot with Jurin that they would see each other again. Meanwhile, Jadid arrived at the palace dungeon to speak with Lady Kendall by order of the emperor. Accepting her inevitable fate, she began to descend, thinking she would soon be executed. Upon reaching the correct floor, she heard the discontented voice of Lisbeth, who didn't understand why they dared to feed her so poorly. Seeing her pink hair, the hero was stunned. He couldn't believe his eyes. Turning to look at him, the girl instantly recognized her dear brother, Jade. She was trembling with shock and confusion. What the hell was Ruby doing there? He ordered her to shut up. She was now Lisbeth Kendall, the sole survivor of the great mage family. In Avalanches, the girl couldn't use magic, but she could use spells thanks to a relic borrowed from the family. The brothers scorned her for this pretense, but Ruby remembered how they had abandoned her. And her mother by fleeing. And now she wondered, was she planning to tell her new friends who she really was? In exchange for his silence, she wanted Jade to free her from this place. If he didn't, before dying, she would reveal the truth about his origin to everyone. And what they did to slaves posing as nobles was worse than death. The entire city was in an uproar when it was learned that Kalyan had imprisoned all the criminals from the auction. Knowing that the emperor had pardoned some mages. Many thought it was because of their noble status. Meanwhile, Ruby arrived at the second prince's mansion without any problems. She presented herself to the guards at the entrance as Lisbeth Kendall, Lady Lembrecht's best friend. After meeting her in the visiting room, the heroine wanted to know, what had she really come for? With her head bowed and ashamed, Lady Kendall wanted to apologize for her behavior at the auction. At the same time, she felt she couldn't have acted otherwise, as Genesía was the one who started everything. First, they were inseparable, but then the heroine became obsessed first with Xavier, then with Manuel, and now with Kalyan too. She turned her back on their friendship, and Lisbeth felt so hurt that she started taking it out on her. Struck by her egocentrism, Genesía never imagined that lady would disappoint her like this again. The girl confessed that they were forgiven for pretending that she and the heroine worked together on time travel. Genesía remembered how she used to feel guilty for treating her friend this way. However, now she decided that their friendship was over once and for all. According to the heroine, friends must respect each other, but Lady Kendall always treated her like a servant. Lisbeth didn't understand how she dared to say that, but Genesía simply turned around and left. Knowing she was forced to leave without finishing her tea, Lady Kendall remembered that the heroine was a nobody without manners. Then, Genesía poured the rest of the tea from the teapot over her head, deciding that now it was over. And the lady could leave in peace. Grinding her teeth and crying from shame, the girl swore she would regret this. At the exit, the heroine met Callion, who thought he should have gone to that meeting with her. But in any case, he thought she had done well, and now he wanted to try cake with her. The emperor executed everyone who trafficked people, but Lisbeth managed to avoid punishment. She was locked in the dungeon and couldn't see His Majesty. So someone delivered her message. And they needed someone to find out about it. And the second prince had the perfect person in mind. At night, Genesía went to the hall to await the arrival of this guest. Upon opening the doors, she was in shock to see that same guest strangling Rupert. And his servants greeting her cheerfully. They informed her that the lady would personally pay for the service, and the hero cried for several nights waiting. The stranger turned out to be the leader of the Ardor Guild, named Miriam, whom His Highness had personally hired.